The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Tonight, John Michael McGrath and yours truly on the end of the legislative session at Queen's Park. Then, J.N. Jagannathan speaks to Ontario's first ever Inspector of Policing. That's ahead on the agenda. JMM, little sugar to start with. You suffering from any triskaidekaphobia today?
No, I'm not.
You know what that is, right?
Yes, it is fear of. It's fear of the number 13?
Exactly.
Yes.
And Friday the 13th is supposed to be doubly problematic.
Yes, for whatever reason, unless you are in Port Dover, Ontario, where they always have this celebration and a meeting of bikers, and I think they now do like concerts and stuff. So yeah, Port Dover. I hope you're having fun today.
Now, I don't want to make any connections between bikers and Godzilla, who's on your T-shirt today, but what is?
So I don't have Friday the 13th. Also a series of horror films that were very popular when I was a child.
Right.
I don't have a Jason in the hockey mask Friday the 13th T-shirt, so I defaulted back to Godzilla.
What about a Freaky Friday thing with Jamie Lee Curtis and I'm blanking now. Who else was in that Freaky
Lindsay
Friday?
Lohan?
Lindsay Lohan. Yeah, thank you.
No, only after I left the house today did it occur to me. Actually, I could have worn my NASA T-shirt and we could have done Apollo 13. But no.
Too late.
Yeah,
you thought about it too late.
But I know who's on your shirt.
You do know who is on my shirt. I suspect this is the first Ontario election you covered. Is that right?
Yes, correct.
Okay, so we'll remind everybody that yesterday was June the 12th. 11 years ago, June the 12th, 2014, Kathleen Wynne won a majority government for the Ontario Liberals. It was obviously an election of incredible historic significance because let me state the obvious. She was the first woman leader in Ontario history to win a general election. She became the 25th Premier of Ontario the year before when she won a convention at Maple Leaf Gardens, or at least what we used to call Maple Leaf Gardens, Mattamy Athletic Centre. And it was a year later that she won that historic election. I had a chance to talk to Premier Wynne for this thing I think we talked about last week, the Premier's Archive, where we've got an archive coming online of interviews with all the living ex-premiers. And we talked about what for her was clearly a magical night in 2014, 11 years ago yesterday. Kathleen Wynne. Did you know election night you were going to win?
My team, I think, did. I think, I was less convinced of that. Certainly not convinced we were going to get a majority. That was, and we didn't have a huge majority. I think it was like 4 or 5 seats in the end. I was definitely hopeful that we'd be able to eke out a win, but would we get to a majority that was actually comfortable enough for us to govern? I didn't know that for sure.
And when you saw that you did?
That was pretty exciting. It was one of those moments where you'd sort of pinch yourself and think, okay, did this really happen? And we'd worked so hard and the team was so happy, and it felt like a huge validation, Steve, of the work that we had done.
I can tell you on election night, it was more than pretty exciting for Wynne and her team because, well, as we suggested, it was historic. And here, can you see the shirt there? Maybe I got to stand up a little bit just to show a little better. That's Kathleen Wynne from her portrait at Queen's Park, where she is. You look down the aisles and there's 24 white men who have been previous premiers, and then number 25, the one and only woman. And that was your first election, right, that you covered?
Yes, that was the first election I covered as a Queen's Park reporter. But you may recall the 2011 election, TVO did a watch party for the election results that night at a bar in downtown Toronto. And that election, that was the first time you and I met, was in that bar on the 2011 watch party.
That's the one where Dalton McGuinty came 1 seat short of a third consecutive majority.
Yes.
Huh. That's our first meeting, eh?
That was the first time we met in person.
How about that?
So,
obviously more meaningful for you than it was for me, because I don't remember that. No, kidding.
But no, the 2014 election, the other thing I will say is, so if you were with the Liberals that night, I was with the Tories. I was at Tim Hudak's. It did not turn out to be a celebration.
No.
And I was, the way these nights go, all the reporters are lined up with our laptops on a table somewhere. And as she alluded to, like we weren't quite sure whether it was going to be a majority, a minority.
Well, she didn't get 40% of the vote. It was a tad under 40, and usually you need 40 to get a majority.
Yeah, I think it was like 37 point something in the end. But so, you know, we were all writing, and none of us quite knew, like, are we writing for a majority, whatever, and we didn't know how long the night was going to be. Were we going to have to wait hours and hours for like a handful of seats to decide the fate of the legislature? And no, the way those results came in that night, that was one of the things I always remember. Is a bunch of us were like, oh well, we thought this was going to be a long night, and it is not.
Yeah.
So,
I just looked it up now. 38.67%.
Yeah.
So it was really for the Liberals a perfect split to get a majority government with only 38.67% of the total vote.
And as she said in the clip there, a narrow majority, but you know, a majority is enough.
A majority is a majority is a majority. That's the way it goes. Okay, anything else, or should we get on with the show?
Let's get moving.
Let's do it. Off to issue one. It is not unusual for the Ontario legislature to take its summer break in June. However, it is unusual for the House not to resume sitting until October. That's a 4-month break for government ministers from the rigors of question period, which of course is the main way the opposition keeps the government accountable in our system. Okay, obvious question, JMM. Why such a long break?
Well, of course, Government House Leader Steve Clark was defending the government on this point when they were debating the various time allocation motions in the last week of the legislature. And he said, you know, they have, I'm going to quote the government here, they have accomplished so much in just I guess it was 7 weeks since they returned from the election in the spring. They had introduced and passed a budget. They had passed some major bills like Bill 5, despite lots of vocal opposition. They've passed a handful of other key government bills, and they've also introduced some more bills that will potentially get some hearing over the summer. They're going to fan out now across the province, and they will, of course, do we've got Ford Fest coming this weekend,
right.
But then they will do other, I'm sure, community events, fundraisers, and just to generally do a victory lap, and not just for the legislative session, but of course I do think a lot of MPPs are also still winding down from the election earlier this year.
That's right. We have to remember it was only a few months ago that everybody went to the polls and the weather was not great. And, you know, it's no one wanted to be door knocking in the middle of February, but that's in fact what they were doing in the Feb 28 general election.
Doug Ford clearly wanted to. Nobody forced him.
That's a fair point. Now, I guess we should hammer this home a little bit. There is a sense out there that when the House is not sitting, members are not working. Right. And to be sure, over the summer, I'm sure they're going to take some time off, as you pointed out, given how rigorous the first 6 months of the years have been. But to say they're on vacation from now until October really isn't fair, is it?
No, I mean, there's always, constituency work that MPPs do. There's a lot of this stuff that doesn't really happen in the public eye, but, MPPs help their constituents interface with the government, right? Like, hey, I'm a small business owner. I'm waiting on a provincial permit here. Can you help me with X, Y, or Z? Connect me with the minister. Those are the kinds of things that that MPPs do. That's outside of the public eye, but it's an extremely valuable part of their job. Frankly, I think for a lot of MPPs, it's the part of the job they like most. It's really the retail side of provincial political service. So it's not at all that they are taking a 4-month vacation, but it is also the case that, as you alluded to at the top, facing the legislature and facing the opposition is also part of the government's job. That is the thing we expect them to do in our constitutional system, and at least this part of the job, the government is giving itself a 4-month break from.
Indeed. And, you leave yourself open to criticism from the opposition when you do something like that, when you take a particularly long time before bringing the House back. And needless to say, the opposition was not too happy about that fact because question period is really their chance to shine. Yeah. Our good pal Martin Redcon from the Toronto Star noted in a recent column that MPPs this year will have sat in the legislature for 13 out of 52 weeks. Yeah. 13 out of 52 weeks in all of 2025. Now, He thinks this will help the Ford government avoid antagonism, for example, related to Bill 5, which of course just turned into a bit of a foo-for-ah. What do you think?
I'd like to connect this to the pay raise and the pension vote that we talked about last week. You and I have talked about this issue a lot. I think we're both on the record at this point saying that this was a long time coming. MPPs were underpaid. MPPs, frankly, deserved a pension in as much as, city councillors and federal MPs already had pensions. It did not make sense anymore for MPPs to go without a pension. But the combination of doing that vote and then immediately voting to take this 4-month break from the legislature. Again, it's not that they're going on vacation, but the government is very clearly giving itself a bit of a 4-month treat here immediately after giving themselves a raise. I think the optics are kind of terrible.
Just kind of terrible.
Just kind of terrible.
Okay, having said all of that, they are going to come back in October. Want to give us a little scene setter about what we can anticipate then?
Right, so just as there is always a budget in the spring, there will be a mini budget, a fall economic statement in the fall. They will undoubtedly have that's the kind of bill that you hang all sorts of things on. So that will be a very important bill for the government to pass. But they did also introduce a bunch of government bills right before the House rose. The way the legislative calendar works is that committees can meet before the House formally returns. So it's at least possible that some of these might get consideration by committees before they go back to the House for a vote. But some of these bills that will not be possible for because they just got introduced too late. But, the government has reintroduced its bill to change the organization of Peel Region. This has been an ongoing issue now for many years, of course. They, every year, or at least once a year, or sometimes twice a year, they introduce a red tape reduction bill, except, of course, with the theme of the current legislature. This one is called the Protect Ontario by Reducing Red Tape. Energy Minister Stephen Lecce also introduced a bill to make changes to the electricity system. Also this week they did announce a new integrated energy plan. I think we're going to have to talk about that more next week because that's a bit of a meatier thing. But these are all bits of legislation that are pretty important that the government is going to want to see make some serious passage in the fall.
All stuff we can look forward to when we come back after the 4-month break.
Yes.
My goodness. And with that, off to issue 2. The Council of the Federation summer meeting this year will take place next month in Huntsville, Ontario, which for those of you watching or listening outside of the province is in the Muskoka region where Premier Doug Ford has a cottage. At the meeting, they will discuss quote-unquote nation-building projects. That is, if they can get to the meeting, because it seems like an ideal gathering to blockade if you were so inclined. So what do they have up their sleeves to deal with that?
Making mischief there at all. I will say that Huntsville, my association, aside from the connection with the Premier, my association with Huntsville is always that it was where the G20 meeting was held before that meeting came to Toronto.
Yes, in 2010.
In 2010, and that became a whole thing that we don't need to go into here.
Remember the gazebos?
Yes.
How much did they spend on those gazebos?
Oh, millions of dollars, and butter smooth asphalt for the entire region, as I recall. Council of the Federation, one of the big things that the premiers will be talking about, certainly here in Ontario, the premier will talk about what he hopes to accomplish with Bill 5. This was the bill, we've talked about it a lot, the Protect Ontario by Unleashing Its Economy Act. The government wants to use these powers to get special projects approved, but Indigenous groups are already quite upset about the passage of the bill. They say it threatens their constitutional rights, and they have in fact threatened blockades, both road and rail blockades. Environmental groups are worried about the government's ability to override environmental protections for animal habitats and ecologically sensitive areas of the province. As I mentioned, Indigenous people, they want guarantees of consultation and meaningful consultation.
Which the Supreme Court guarantees.
Yes, the Supreme Court and the Constitution both say these things are non-negotiable, but the Supreme Court also says that Indigenous people are not guaranteed an outcome, right? They are required to be consulted, but they don't get to put it colloquially, they don't get a veto.
Right.
And how the government navigates that will be, and navigate all of this, clearly the possibility for very noisy acrimony, how they navigate this will be worth watching.
Well, the Council of the Federation sounds like a Star Trek term, which is why you and I like that title.
Yes, very much.
But essentially, it's just basically the premiers of the country all getting together. That's what the council is.
Yes.
Premier Mark Carney obviously is going to keep a very close
Prime
eye
Minister.
on this. There we go. Thank you. I was going to say I didn't mean to demote him, but in some cases that would not be a demotion. Anyway, he has talked obviously a great deal about going forward on some nation-building projects that have been sort of delayed over the last decade. And there was a bit of news on that front last week. Why don't you bring us up to scratch on that?
Right. So we got the text of Carney's Bill C5. Now, this you're going to have to keep clear that there is the Ford government's Bill 5 and there is the federal government's Bill C5. But they are very similar pieces of legislation. One bit of Bill C5 is to eliminate interprovincial trade barriers that happen to fall in federal jurisdiction. The other, and this is where it's similar to the Ford government's bill to create special economic zones, this would allow the federal government to designate projects as national interest projects, and fundamentally does the same stuff as Bill 5. It allows them to exempt these national interest projects from various bits of federal legislation in the hopes of getting them much faster approvals. One big difference between the two pieces of legislation is that Bill C5's powers actually come with an expiry date. They expire after 5 years. Bill C5 also requires that Cabinet consult provincial premiers or Indigenous groups that might be affected by any particular national project, but it does not require their consent. It just requires that they be consulted. So that has just been introduced. It has not been passed by the Commons. Mark Carney has an obstacle that somebody like Doug Ford does not, in that he also has to get it through a Senate. He has said in the press conference where they introduced this bill that he would love to see it passed by before the federal parliament rises for the summer. That is not entirely within his hands, right? Like he has to get it through a Senate, and the Senate is filled with people he did not pick because he just hasn't been around that long. So we'll see how it goes.
Should we show up at the Council of the Federation meeting in a couple of Star Trek tunics? What do you think?
I think of the 13 premiers, there must be at least one who would enjoy the humor there. I'm not sure that Ontario's premier would get the joke. I'm not sure he's much of a Star Trek fan.
Doesn't give me that vibe, but you never know.
Yeah, you never know.
You never know. That's right. Okay, let's get on to issue 3. Things have been looking a little hazy over the last week as wildfire smoke rolled across the province. This has become a perennial issue, and sadly, we can expect more as summer continues. Prime Minister Carney sent in the Canadian Armed Forces to help evacuate more than 900 people from the northern community of Sandy Lake First Nation last week. And we've got some footage of what some construction workers faced up there. Let's take a look.
What? It's gonna get harder real long, boys. And there's gonna be explosions, so be careful.
That is just astonishing footage. And I can remember, gosh, how long ago was it? I think it was 1989. I was at CBC at the time, and I was a kind of a summer fill-in reporter in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. Right. They sent me out there to backfill for someone. And, being a kid from Southern Ontario, you don't see a lot of these widespread forest fires. And I sort of wondered to myself, how does a fire start on one side of a highway and then literally go over to the other side of the highway? And like an idiot, I didn't know how that happened until I actually watched it happen before my very eyes.
Yeah.
It was a perfectly calm day, and then all of a sudden, a gust of wind came up and literally picked up a whole bunch of pine needles and transported them across the highway, and the fire just continued across the highway. It's one of the most terrifying situations you can find yourself in.
Yeah.
Anyway, they tried to build a fire break to contain that fire there. They quickly found themselves surrounded. Everybody thankfully survived all that. But it does raise some questions about what the province of Ontario is doing or is able to do under these circumstances. What do you know?
So back in March, the province said it had filled 100 new permanent positions to help fight forest fires. the government has been criticized in recent years for not spending enough on wildland fires. The government has also ordered 6 more water bombers in addition to the 9 that already exist. The budget for wildland fires keeps fluctuating because some fire seasons are worse than others. The allocated budget for firefighting this year has shrunk from $177 million to $135 million. That said, the Finance Minister, Peter Bethlenfalvy, has said the government does have a contingency fund so they can increase the amount of money they spend for northern firefighting as needed. They have also partnered with the federal government for $64 million in funding. The area that has burned this year is already 38 times higher compared to last year. So these fires are already enormous. And I do just want to make the point here that, it was considered, and it was a major accomplishment when we saw a major reduction in smog days. And some summers we went entirely without smog days.
Yes.
And this, where we are now in Ontario, right? Like the air quality in Toronto is not getting worse because of smog. It's because forest fires are now so large and burning so uncontrolled that we're getting forest fire smoke here in Toronto.
It's so strange, isn't it? We finally shut down all the coal-fire electricity generation stations and thought smog days are behind us, and yet here we are with new reasons for smog days. I wanted to ask you about water bombers because, of course, you need water bombers to put this stuff out. What are the odds on getting that kind of equipment into use here?
Well, they want them. We could certainly use them, but there's a high demand for them and not enough to go around. And then you've also got pilots, technicians. These are large planes. They take a lot of maintenance. OPSU, the union that represents the government's aviation workers, rejected an offer that would have made Ontario, they say would have made Ontario second to last in terms of wages for these kinds of pilots and technicians. The union argues that a lack of good wages makes attracting new pilots difficult, and it makes it difficult to retain existing ones. So they put a notice up on their site. They said that there is at least one plane in Sault Ste. Marie that is sitting on the tarmac because there just are not enough personnel to use it. And this, of course, is a repeating story in Ontario that, it does not matter how many hospitals you build, how many beds you have, how many schools you build, how many classrooms you have. You need nurses, you need doctors, you need teachers, and you need the pilots for the water bombers.
Indeed. Okay. Best wishes, obviously, to everybody in Northern Ontario.
Absolutely,
let's hope
yes.
everybody gets through this okay. In the meantime, off to your column, my column. You know this regular feature we present here on Poly. We call it Your Column, My Column, in which JMM and I have a little chat about the columns that we wrote for TVO.org over the past week. And I gather you've got double trouble for us this week.
I do, indeed. Double jeopardy, perhaps. Both of my columns on the website this week are about different aspects of housing. The first is about some items that are going before Toronto City Council this week. By the time this goes to air, they will have already been debated. Going to committee, I should say, about making it easier to build multiplex housing, right? 3 apartments in a home, 4 apartments in a home. The city is looking at rules that would make it allowable much more broadly. But one of the items that was in this committee report, buried in the committee report, was that while they are making it permissible to build up to 3 stories for these types of buildings, they can't build to 4 stories unless there are changes to the provincial building code.
Uh-huh.
The province has said it's looking at allowing 4 stories for townhouses, for like a single family home, but the Premier has expressed his skepticism, his antipathy.
I think the word you're looking for is outright opposition.
Outright opposition to the slogan that some housing advocates have used is like 4 stories and 4 plexes and 4 stories, right? Allow 4 units and in a single building, in a 4-story tall building. It would be good if the province could make these changes to the building code, because as I argue in the piece, basically we need to figure out ways to give people square feet. As people get wealthier, it's not like the most romantic way to describe a home, but like as people get wealthier, they just want more space. And this is a way to do that efficiently. Separately, my second column was speaking with Peter Gilligan of Mattamy Homes, who is for the second time going to try basically prefabricated housing. Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, Mattamy, under a brand called Stellumar, they would pre-assemble it, like build a home entirely inside a factory, and then they would like tractor the home out to the site and like plunk it down onto the foundation. And it didn't work, or at least that didn't endure, because basically people are fussy about the finishes they want in their homes, and as Mr. Gilligan explained to me, basically all of that complexity made it just too difficult to do that profitably. But he's going to try again. This week they announced that they are looking at modular mid-rise homes, like 6-story apartment buildings that they will assemble out of modules built in a factory. And their hope is that they could go from getting the planning permission from the city to handing over keys to a new young family, perhaps, who's just looking to get their first home, that they could do that within a year.
Wouldn't that be great?
It would be great. Lots of companies have tried to make this work. Most have not succeeded, but this is exactly the kind of thing that both the provincial and federal government are very, very interested in right now. So I think, quite aside from whatever your housing situation is at right now, both at Queen's Park and in Ottawa, there are people wishing him a lot of luck.
Do you know why Peter Gilligan, apropos of nothing, called his company Mattamy Homes?
No.
It's called Mattamy Homes because he named it after two of his kids, Matt and Amy. And we had a representative from Mattamy Homes on the agenda not too long ago, and I asked him, what do the other 4 kids think about the fact that they're not named in any of the...
Well, but so the Stellumar brand.
There you go.
That's his other kids.
Those are
Yes.
that's right. Those are the letters from the other kids' names, Stellumar. Yes. So all 6 kids are taken care of, I gather. So there's peace in the household.
Now that the Stellumar brand has been revived.
There we go.
How about you?
Well, you remember last week we talked about the fact that I think it was about more than 100 people gathered at the Albany Club for a 30th anniversary reunion of the Mike Harris improbable election victory from 1995, the so-called Common Sense Revolution victory. It was really, I have to say, for the people who showed up at this thing, I think a very trippy and fun reunion for them. I wrote a column about it. I mentioned the fact that these people were very glad to see each other. They have been in the trenches for a long time. Some of them hadn't seen each other in a very long time. I also mentioned that there were some failings in the Mike Harris years, and I mentioned those in my column as well. But I did not dwell on those. I dwelled on the fact that these people were coming together. And we've got some pictures here. Why don't we just go through some of these pictures? And now that's Jamie Watt, who's head of Navigator now, one of the crisis communication, I guess, better known firms in this country. And Jamie was there as part of the original Common Sense Revolution group. And there's 2 other guys, Tom Long on the left, Alistair Campbell on the right. Again, the idea was, usually you go to the Albany Club and you got to be suit and tie, or at least suit and collared shirt, but they said, wear your campaign stuff today. We're breaking the rules. So those guys were obviously very influential in Mike Harris's inner circle. Okay, that's Fred. Fred drove the bus.
Right.
Freddie drove the bus, and Freddie was there and just, having a great time reminiscing about how things were back in the day. It was great to see Freddie again. Premier Mike Harris seated in the back there, while Doug Ford went to the lectern to say that in his view, Mike Harris was the best premier in Ontario history. That's what Doug Ford said. And the 2 men have a bit of a connection in as much as Doug Ford's father was a member of Mike Harris's caucus, and now Mike Harris's son, Mike Jr., is a minister in Doug Ford's government. And in fact, he has the natural resources portfolio, which, of course, let's bring it full circle, Mike Harris, the dad, had in Frank Miller's government. So they were both, you got 2 natural resources ministers named Mike Harris in Ontario history. That's Leslie Noble on the left. Leslie Noble and Tom Long both giving speeches. Leslie, again, part of the inner circle back in the day. Oh, gosh, okay. I'm using my moderator's prerogative here to show this. 22 years ago, I launched a book, and I can't even remember which one it was, but I thought, how about Mike Harris showed up to the book launch, and I thought, how about I hand my baby daughter to Mr. Harris and we'll take a little picture. And I thought, why don't we reprise the picture 22 years later? That's my daughter Julia on the right, and there's Mike Harris, now 80 years old, on the left. I think he still looks pretty darn good, I got to say.
That's 80.
And yeah, time does march on. I want to say one last thing about this, and that is not only who was there, but who wasn't there. Part of the inner circle back in the day was a guy named John Mikitician, whom we've had on TVO multiple times over the years. John was not at this event because, quite shockingly, he's 66 years old. He had emergency open heart surgery just a few days before this event was to take place, and therefore he obviously could not come. John is still recovering in hospital. To the best of my knowledge, I saw him last weekend. He is in a coma still and has not yet come out of it. So, John, we are sending all of our prayers to you and your family. Carol and his daughter and I saw each other last weekend, and we're hoping he pulls through. We want more good news to come out of Hamilton General Hospital because John was a charter member of the Common Sense Revolution and a good guy, and, we want to see him again up and at him.
Absolutely. Again, if you'd like to ask about content on the show, please email us at onpolitics@tvo.org.
And that is the On Poly podcast for this Friday, the 13th of June, 2025.
You can follow our show on Apple Podcasts so that you get notified each time a new episode is available. And you can see the video version of the podcast on the TVO Today YouTube channel.
Special thanks, as always, to our studio crew here in the room. Hi, David. Hi, Ian. Hi, Tina. Thanks for showing up today, guys, and keeping us in focus and looking good. And until next Friday, everybody, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
In 2023, the Ontario government appointed Ryan Teschner to lead the province's Inspectorate of Policing. Tasked with keeping the policing sector accountable, the oversight body has released their first report highlighting the complexities of policing protests and other major events across the province. Joining us now to discuss their findings is Ryan Teschner, Ontario's first Inspector General of Policing. Welcome, sir.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
All right, break it down for us. First off, what is the role of the Inspector General of Policing?
The Inspector General of Policing is a first-of-its-kind role anywhere across the country. It provides policing oversight to what I call both sides of the house. The policies and governance of policing that is conducted by police service boards, and the actual policing on the ground, the operations conducted by police services. We do so independently by conducting inspections or investigations. We do that proactively and also in response to public complaints. And everything that we do is animated by data and analytics so that we can be at the right place at the right time, all in the interests of Ontarians.
All right, you've been in this position a little over a year, and you've been quite busy traveling across this province. What's been the main focus over the last 12 months?
Well, first I thought it was important to introduce myself, my role, to the sector, to the policing sector. And so I made a commitment to travel to all 44 police services that we have in Ontario and their boards. We're just a few away from being done, but in each and every one of those, I've traveled to the local community where that policing is delivered, whether that's in Cornwall or Thunder Bay, Toronto, Peel, or Hamilton. I've met with chiefs and their command officers and board members to talk about what we are going to do at the Inspectorate to help improve policing across Ontario and make everyone safer. I've also been talking to them about how we'll approach our work based on risk so that we're in the right place at the right time. And I've asked them about the challenges that they're experiencing locally in the delivery of police services, as well as some of the highlights of what they're doing. Every conversation has been informative, and I've appreciated the sector's welcome.
Of the 44, how many have you visited so far?
We have only 3 left to do.
Who are the 3?
I'm going to be going to West Grey, as well as a couple of other services that I haven't yet had the opportunity to visit. But, this has been a year-long effort, a great team that's been supporting me. And like I said, a real welcoming from the sector, which is unusual for a new oversight body.
All right, I want to talk a little bit about your resume. You've worked as a lawyer in community safety, police governance, and public administration. You also were the lead counsel in the G20 Review Committee. In other words, some may say that you don't have experience as a police officer. You never laced those boots. Do you think that makes a difference in the role that you have in terms of sort of bridging that gap there?
I'd like to think of it as a strength. Good oversight is about independence and independence of thought. Fortunately for me at the Inspectorate of Policing, I have a great team around me, including some individuals who come directly from policing at all ranks and levels, including the Deputy Inspector General, who came as a retired Deputy Chief of Police. So we've got a lot of policing experience in the organization. We also have a lot of data analytics experience in the organization. And what I try to do is bring my legal lens, bring my understanding of the policing system, including its governance, and my experience from the various roles that I've had to bring a fresh perspective and independent oversight.
I'm hoping you can help explain a little bit about sort of the role of the IOP. And yes, you're working with police on one side, making sure you understand what their needs are, what their stresses are, how they can be, better efficient at their work, but also feel safe. But on the community side, you also are dealing with complaints. You are also, investigating, making sure you can bridge that gap. Tell me what that side of it looks like. Many people may not know, it's, as you mentioned, you're making that connection with the police services, but what's the work on the other side?
Well, as I said, we are both proactive and reactive in applying our mandate. Proactive in the sense that I can decide to inspect against a certain issue, public order policing being the most recent one, and reactive and responsive in the sense that we also receive public complaints. To date, we've received over 900 of them. Wow. And the complaints can be broken down into really two categories. Our jurisdiction at the Inspectorate relates to how police services are delivered and whether those police services are being delivered in compliance with Ontario's laws. And then the second bucket is the conduct of police board members who all must follow a code of conduct that's been legislated by the Ontario government, and we're responsible for ensuring that we probe those complaints independently and make our findings.
All right, let's talk about your report. Last month you released your first report highlighting the complexity and demand of policing major public events in Ontario. Here are a few of your 12 recommendations to strengthen the province's public order policing system. Formalize the Ontario Public Order Hub, create a uniform approach to risk assessment, define reasonable response times, strengthen emergency partnerships, and enhance public order unit officer training. All right, break down some of those for me. Why are these recommendations crucial to maintaining public safety?
So first, I think it's important for everybody to know my fundamental conclusion, which is the state of public order policing in Ontario is strong. We also, though, recognize that with increasing demand and complexity of mass events and protests, the system is under some strain. And so these 12 recommendations really are a roadmap to improve the system, make sure that it is sustainable in the long term, and ultimately ensure that Ontario continues to lead in this country when it comes to this particular policing function. And so we saw over the course of the 4 years of data we examined, almost a 200% increase in the deployments of public order units across this province. And viewers will know some of these very well from images during the convoy, as well as more recent images in streets right across this province from the Israel and Hamas war, for example. Those come with a cost. They come with a financial cost to police services that have to pay the salaries of those officers who are doing this important work. They come with a cost to the officers themselves, who are experiencing fatigue and strain because they're doing another job on top of this public order unit work. And they can sometimes come with a cost to society in terms of making sure that we have the right people in the right places at the right time, providing respectful policing, but ultimately in the interests of making sure that we're facilitating people's right to express themselves while also making sure that other people can go about their day-to-day business. So it's a tough balance, and we wanted to put forward a report that helps strike that balance in the long term. I want
to pick up on that balance because, the Community Safety and Policing Act replaced the Policing Services Act. And obviously one of the things you look at from that name is there's obviously there's an emphasis more on the community safety concerns. One of the things that you mentioned, given the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas and its impact on local communities, how do you find the balance? The concerns of residents who may feel vulnerable or affected by global events while ensuring public safety. This is something that is not easy. You talk about officers being thrown into situations that,
Sure.
they may not be prepared for, but how do you balance those two things?
Well, let me first start off by saying that what's true of politics is also true of policing. All policing is local, but local policing is animated by global events. And we see this in communities right across this province. And so it's important that in delivering policing functions, police are as effective as they can be. They've got the right people trained the right way with the right tools to be deployed. And they're also building in community sentiment and understanding and awareness into the way that they're policing. And so some of my recommendations are aimed at ensuring that the public order policing system can continue to do that. Whether you look at the hub model, which is a great way to coordinate the deployment of public order units across this province to make sure that we've got the right teams in the right places. Whether you look at what I'm considering a need for a unified risk assessment model so that all police services are assessing public order risk the same way and making deployment decisions in a consistent way no matter where in the province they are, or whether it's the training for officers that in addition to the fundamental basic training, they also are given increased training for cultural awareness and sensitivity. So when they're deployed in a particular situation, they have the backstop, they have the context around it to understand what is animating these protests and how to approach the policing of those protests in a way that is ultimately going to keep everybody safer.
All right, I want to go back to your journey across the province. Of the forces that you visited, are there any shared problems or even shared successes?
There's both. In terms of shared challenges, I've heard a lot about the impact on officers of the current context of policing in terms of fatigue, but also in terms of injury and officers having to take time off work. Obviously, every officer that needs to be off work means one officer less in that community. And so it's important to support officers through their journey and through their career. And if they encounter an injury and need to be off work, support them ultimately, hopefully, to return in a way that is most effective. And so we have seen great examples in large services like Toronto and Peel. We've seen it in smaller services like St. Thomas and others, where they have worked with officers who are off, brought them back into meaningful functions that they are able to do even with their injury, and over time return to full-time duty. So that's a shared challenge, but also a shared confronting of that challenge in a way I think that has made a great difference. Of course, we've also heard about the constellation of social issues that manifest in the work of police officers day to day, whether that's addiction issues, homelessness issues, or others. And so right across this province, we're seeing the manifestations of that. But again, we're also seeing police services come together with public health and health partners to confront those challenges through mobile crisis intervention teams, for example, where you have a police officer partnered with a nurse or a social worker out in the community, providing the best response to somebody who might be going through a mental health crisis.
We know that this province is not built equally. Whether we talk about the vast geography of it, whether we talk about sort of the money that gets poured into sort of the services, whether it's policing or so forth. Based off of your travels, what are some trouble spots within Ontario?
Well, I think police services right across this province are confronting certain challenges when it comes to the cost of policing. And that's why the role of police service boards, which is not as well known to sort of the general public, are so important. Yes, they're the governors of the police service, but they're also the financiers. They're the ones who fashion a budget based on the advice of the chief of police, and they ultimately decide what it will cost to deliver adequate and effective policing. But police budgets come from the local municipal tax base for the most part. And so making sure that we are looking around corners, identifying future and anticipated challenges so that those budgets and the plans around them can actually be responsive to local needs, that is what is important. And in the new Community Safety Policing Act, every police service board has to consult with their chief and develop a strategic plan that's in place for a period of years to help serve as a roadmap for that police service, so that it's not a year-to-year thing where you're evaluating, you're actually seeing how you're doing along a longer journey.
As we know, the Ontario Provincial Police is not the local police service for the entire province of Ontario. Do you see a future with the OPP expanding beyond sort of its current jurisdictions?
Well, the OPP does great work in dozens upon dozens of communities across the province where they have primary policing responsibility, and dozens of communities where they provide a supportive role. Public order policing is a great example. The convoy protest that happened in 2022, the OPP deployed public order teams in support of Ottawa and Windsor and others to assist. And so increasingly we are seeing a need for the OPP to be nimble and to be responsive to a myriad of issues that present, including issues at the border with the United States, where they currently have an operation ongoing that they are leading, and other municipal police services and the RCMP are supporting. And so I think it's important to ensure that as the provincial police service, the OPP has the tools and resources that it needs to meet an increasingly demand in a growing province with a growing population and increasingly complex public safety issues.
Indigenous communities and police have had let's say, a rocky history in this province. Do we need a new relationship between Indigenous police services, I believe there's 9 First Nations services in this province, and the OPP?
Well, so the Community Safety Policing Act included a brand new mechanism, and we celebrated a recent milestone where for the first time in Ontario history, a First Nations community or band council can opt in to the Police Act. And the Anishinaabe-Aski Nation, in coordination with the Anishinaabe-Aski Police Service and Board, was the very first that just last December has opted in to the Police Service Act. And so now you have a newly constituted police service that is subject to the same oversight as any other municipal police service or the OPP, and also must meet the adequacy standards of municipal services in the OPP. And so in cooperation with the Ontario government that announced some funding, that police service is now operating in this new environment, and we're working very closely with them in partnership to, again, explain our role, but also learn about some of the challenges policing in some of these communities that are in the very far north, some of which you can only access by winter roads or fly-in. And so the unique dimensions of First Nations policing need to be top of mind to any government, but also to any oversight body that applies its mandate.
I know that your focus for the most part has been Ontario, but it's hard to kind of imagine that, we don't watch the headlines that are happening south of the border. I am curious, I want to get your takes. What are your thoughts about what's happening currently right now in California? We've got 4,000 National Guard members, 700 Marines called to respond to protests against immigration raids, all orders from the U.S. president, not the governor there. Just curious, I know this is not your jurisdiction, but as someone who this is what you look at for here in the province, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts is that I'm grateful that we have the system that we have in this province and in this country, where we have premiers and prime ministers that work together on community safety challenges, where we have police chiefs that have their own independent mandate and jurisdiction, and police boards that oversee and govern them. And wrapped around all of this, independent oversight bodies that have the ability to call it like they see it, but ultimately call it like they see it to make sure that the system is the very best that it can be. Fortunately, I don't have a personal social media account out in the Twitterverse or Truth Social, and so I don't have to worry about maybe incurring President Trump's wrath. Right. But I will say it is troubling to me when a local leader that has been elected by his fellow residents is saying that their local police service and services can handle the situation. And despite that, and seemingly with very little dialogue certainly not with partnership. A decision is made to have others enter that jurisdiction without coordination, without real planning, and then the question becomes to what end? And so taking a situation that is already volatile and potentially making it more volatile with the absence of dialogue, I think that's something that is troubling, and fortunately not something that I've been seeing here in Ontario.
All right, I've got about 30 seconds left, and I'm going to ask you a pretty big question here. I'm going to give you all the power here. You've got the magic wand.
Okay.
What do you want to change in policing across the province right now?
We released a strategic plan that lays out 3 priorities, and one of them is about looking around corners and anticipating risks. So we are seeing a situation where different parts of the system are working well, but others are under strain. And so ultimately, my goal is to make sure that we at the Inspectorate paint a whole picture of how policing is delivered, help police services improve their performance to make everyone safer. Sometimes that's going to be about money. Sometimes that's going to be about better training. And sometimes that's going to be about doing things more consistently across the province. And so we're going to be applying the tools of our trade, following the evidence through our different inspections and our data and analytics to help police services and boards be the very best they can be, not just in this province, but right across this country.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Ryan Teschner, thank you so much. Ryan Teschner is Ontario's first Inspector General of Policing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This program debuted in 2006. Have we become a more or less equal country since then?
I would say less equal since 2006, but in the interim, we saw a little bit of improvement in inequality. And the Gini coefficient measures what's happening right in the center of the distribution. The real story is what's happening at the two ends of the distribution, and that's what we should be talking about.
And we shall. Quam, what say you?
I think we've become more unequal. I think we've become more unequal in a number of ways. We've become more unequal from an income and wealth perspective. We've become more unequal with regards to opportunity. We've become more unequal with regards to health. And we've become more unequal with regards to whether people are living dignity. So I think we've become more unequal in many ways, and it's not an even distribution, as Armin said. So racialized populations, younger people, so under 35s, they're the people who've been really taking the brunt of what's happening.
Much to pick up on there. Brian, what do you say?
I think in some ways we have. I think the question of inequality is not necessarily the best one to ask. There may be occasions where people are making lots of money or doing very well. LeBron James is one example, but there's no way I'll be equal with him playing basketball. And I think there are some things that's fine. I think what we should be concerned about is the prospects and the quality of life for those who are most vulnerable and at the lowest end of the sphere. That's what I'm most interested in, are those who are the poorest and the most vulnerable. Do they have opportunity, and are they being taken care of? And more importantly, do we have the structures in place that allow those people to thrive? That's what I'm most concerned about.
Well, let me follow up. Let me answer. Yeah. Let me get you to answer those questions.
And I think on that, we've got lots of work to do. As Quam said, I think there are some major challenges between the old and the young, and there's growing inequality there. And I think in Canada, there's some significant challenges with inequality amongst those who have university degrees or college certificates and those who are working class. And I think we've seen some major changes there.
Esme, it's often the case that when we hear media personalities or commentators opining about populism, it's often bound up with terms like xenophobia, nativism. It's not meant to be a positive thing. How much, in your view, is populism bound together with all of those other sort of more nefarious elements?
So yes, I think populism generally, and particularly by academics, is kind of seen in a very derogatory sense. So it does come kind of with a loaded sense. Does it have to be xenophobic? No. Does it have to be nativist? No. But those are many of the characteristics that you would see among populism. And one of the things that's really important about populism is you have to really understand the context in which it appears, and it's very context dependent. We do see some kind of patterns or commonality currently, and again, it's very much the specific moment. It's mostly on the right wing, and so in the right wing sense, yes, there is quite a lot of alignment on these kind of nativist views, anti-immigrant, xenophobic, certainly. Even I would say lots of views on environment, gender, immigration, a lot of the cultural stuff, certainly. But more broadly, I think it's has to be figured out in terms of what country are we talking about, because that may not present itself in a different context, different country, or different leader.
Well, that's interesting in as much as, Lawrence, when I was a kid, populism was always a thing of the left wing, right? The NDP was very much a populist movement that emerged from the prairies in Canada. I guess it's not still the case that populism is a left-wing thing on this continent, is it?
No, but again, I think the political science literature on the concept argues that it can come from the right or the left, and that depends a little bit on the context and the timing. I mean, we had the progressives in Canada in the 1920s, and a number of European countries right now, particularly Spain and Greece. You find populist parties that are on the left, but you also find others that are on the right, as in Austria or the Netherlands. So it's compatible with different ideologies, but the essential a core element, I think, which has already been mentioned by everybody along the way here, is the idea of the people versus the establishment, us versus them.
And that is the agenda for Friday, June 13th, 2025. Monday on the program, how has Canada's relationship with Indigenous peoples evolved since the agenda debuted 19 years ago? We'll explore that. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org. Have a great weekend, everybody, and we'll see you again on Monday.